We have a new national champion in college football, but it's not going to be a different conference that wins. For the first time since 1960, 1961, the Big Ten has back to back national champions. If you are new around here, I am Colin Basher, going to talk about college football year round. Wanted to take 24 hours to sit on it. Also wanted to take yesterday off because I just couldn't get a good plan for you guys for the video I was wanting to do. And if I couldn't do it 100%, I figured just try to focus more on TikTok yesterday. The Ohio State Buckeyes, they get it done. They get it done in an emphatic fashion. Will Howard is the story of the night, but there's so many stories of the night. And we're going to cover all of that. We're going to cover both sides of it, both angles of it, the Ohio State and Notre Dame side, and a couple of different perspectives going from tonight and then what's going forward. So Ohio State, when they fell down in that game 7-0, it wasn't really panic mode if you are an Ohio State fan, but it was definitely like that was weird. I mean, I don't think Notre Dame's going to be able to do this forever, but it was weird that they were able to take 9 minutes and 45 seconds off the clock before Ohio State got the ball. That was the way Notre Dame was going to hang around in the game, but the issue is the way that they had that prolonged drive. And the way they did it was through Riley Leonard, straight up just putting the team on his back, just doing things that are superhuman and looking very human at the end of the drive with being exhausted, wanting to throw up and being beat up and all of that stuff. But the big takeaway that I had is they gave up on traditional run game very early on, giving the ball to Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. They gave up on that very early on, and that's what really led to the Ohio State Avalanche. At the end of the first quarter, they were slowly moving the ball down the field, and then they end up early in the second quarter capping it off with an easy Jeremiah Smith touchdown. And then it was, all right, get Notre Dame off the field, go down and score. Get Notre Dame off the field, go down and score. 21-7 in a blink of an eye as we go into halftime. And then in a blink of an eye, it was 31-7 Ohio State. And it looked like it was about to get ugly. And, of course, Emeka Egbuka had the ball punched out, and Notre Dame ended up making a heck of a comeback. And quite honestly, they would have had a real shot if instead of settling for a missed field goal, they would have found a way to get a touchdown inside the red zone there. That would have been huge for Notre Dame. That's a common theme with Ohio State. Big time red zone stops. Even in the embarrassing loss that they had to Michigan and both of the losses that they suffered this season, they still have that one thing that they hung their hat on: red zone stops. They stopped Michigan in the red zone. They stopped Oregon in the red zone. And they also did that in other games, a lot of other games. The number one red zone defense in America stood up, and then with a little bit of luck of Mitch Jeter hitting the upright, they got Notre Dame off the field in the red zone with no points. That was really game over at that point. Yeah, Notre Dame had a big fight, and the third down and 11 was massive. But to me, I felt like it was insurmountable. It would have taken a massive miracle after that missed kick. And quite honestly, even if he made it, still probably would have been a big miracle. It just would have been a little bit less of an ask, and they could have came back to win the game there in regulation. But nonetheless, Ohio State holds on. They get the field goal to cover the 8.5-point spread. They hold Notre Dame in the last couple of plays. And Ohio State captures their 9th national championship. And when you take a look at this team and their legacy that they're going to hold, that is something I want to discuss and save for last. Because I think that this Ohio State team is in a very unique spot that we've never seen before, and we have to break it down into different sections. So let's talk about Ohio State real quick as they go into next year. This team to me is going to be pretty good next year as well, like up there at the top of the sport yet again, just like they have been. I would be kind of shocked if Ohio State does not make the 12-team playoff next year. And I would be more shocked that Ohio State misses the 12-team playoff than I would Ohio State makes it back to the national championship. The thing about Ohio State going into next year is you're going to have the comfort with a new quarterback of an offensive line that was interior, was playing pretty well at the end of the season. You got some answers. You got your trio, Austin Sareveld, Luke Montgomery, and Carson Ensman. Those guys can be on the interior. And by the way, they're going to have depth there as well. Tested depth. And that's going to be a huge thing. What they have coming in at tackle with Ethan Onyanwa is big time. Absolutely big time right there. And then they're going to have a competition for the right tackle spot. And that's going to be the only question. But number one, I think it's, a battle between good players and players with a lot of potential. And number two, if your weak link is the right tackle, everybody in football knows this. You can win with just an average right tackle. You can win a national championship that way. We've seen it done before. And frankly, Ohio State, no slight at Josh Fryer, Ohio State just did it. And they frankly won the national championship with an average offensive line who was really playing their best capability of football through the last 4 games. And that's massive for Ohio State. That new quarterback's also going to have the weapons on the outside. You caught flashes and big moments. Brandon Ennis had one earlier this year with Penn State, and he had one last night against Notre Dame. Brandon Ennis is going to be that wide receiver 3, take over Emeka Egbuka's role, and it will be Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith, and I'm sure they're going to find ways to get Mylan Graham on the field as well. And then you've had situations, too, where Bryson Rogers, who's still there, has also hit the field. And as long as Bryson Rogers is sticking around, you could see him also compete for some playing time there. Ohio State offensively, to me, is going to be fine. They kind of have the running back position figured out. And frankly, if that offensive line is going to play as well as I think they could, it's not going to matter too much. But I think James Peoples has a lot of potential. I like the transfer out of C.J. Donaldson. And I also think that one of these freshman running backs, in particular, Bo Jackson, he's going to be able to make an impact as a true freshman. So the big question, again, for Ohio State for a third year in a row is going to be quarterback. But Ohio State fans are going to have a little bit more confidence about the quarterback position based on how the offseason has looked and the coaches have talked about Julian Sayin. On that defensive side of the ball, a lot of people will buzz around that. But I think a big tell was today, Calvin Simpson-Hunt hit the transfer portal the day after the national championship, which is pretty significant because that tells you that, okay, we're good at corner. If a talented kid like that is leaving without trying to battle, somebody is making a push. Maybe Davison Igbinosun is coming back, and I quite honestly think he probably should with just how penalty prone he is. He led FBS out of any defensive backs or any defensive players in penalties and coverage. It's not very good. I think he's an amazing talent. He's got to refine his skills there. It reminds me a lot of how Josh Simmons was on the offensive line last year. The penalties were a big deal, and they have to be able to address them. And Davison Igbinosun, in this case, has to be able to handle those penalties and refine his skills so that way he can go and play in the NFL because he's not going to get away with anything up there. The other part about this defense that I'm very encouraged about is in the playoff in particular, but even in the regular season, you were seeing meaningful snaps from true freshmen, Caden McDonald and Edric Houston. I don't think the drop-off is going to be that significant, if at all, at defensive tackle, the way that they played. The only concern I have is definitely, we got to see if that depth is going to be tested at defensive tackle. But those two are going to start at D tackle, and I think they're going to do a fantastic job. We'll see about the dynamic ability on the edge. I was impressed with Kenyatta Jackson when he came in and played. I've been impressed at times with Caden Curry as well, and they got other dudes who have rotated in and played a little bit. And then I think it would be smart for Jim Knowles and that defense to consider moving CJ Hicks, the former five-star linebacker, to more of an edge rusher role, because I just think the linebacker thing is not coming along with him. And I think that that's somewhere where he could have a saving grace as an Ohio State player. Linebacker. I don't know if Sonny Styles is coming back yet. I'm 50-50 on that. We know Cody Simon is out the door. But I also know that Gabe Powers left. I don't necessarily know what they have at linebacker for next year. That might be the concern. Arvell Reese is an absolute animal. Like, I'm not concerned about him starting. I know he's going to start, and I know he's going to be really good. The question is, will Sonny come back? And if he doesn't come back, who's going to be that guy that's going to be with Arvell Reese next season? That's going to be the big question I have. And finally, we're fine. Like, Ohio State's fine at safety. Caleb Downs is coming back. We've seen Jalen McClain come in when Lathan Ransom was hurt, and he played fantastic. We also saw Malik Hartford play as a freshman, and he played very well as well. They made a young safety transfer out. I think the safety position is, again, going to be a strength, and that's just, kind of par for the course with how Jim Knowles and his defenses have been ever since he got to town. All in all, long story short, when you're talking about what this roster is going to develop into, I don't know if it's going to be a championship team next year. You never know what a championship identity is going to look like. You can kind of get a feel for it on the outside sometimes. I feel like the last 2 seasons with Ohio State and Michigan, you got a feel for that in the preseason that those teams could do it. And it's just a matter of, can they just get over the hump? In both cases, they did it, but you felt that mentality and that edge about those 2 teams that won it the last 2 years. And I'm not sure if you're going to feel that same thing around Ohio State, because they are going to be replacing a lot. I think they're uber talented, though, and I think they're going to be right there in the thick of the conversation in November and December, and eventually maybe even in January. And I think Ohio State's got a real chance to be at the top of the sport yet again next year. Notre Dame, they're gritty comeback, man. I could not help but to be impressed with how Riley Leonard pretty much played his best game as a passer in that game. He really showed up in that second half, late third quarter, and the whole fourth quarter, trying to lead Notre Dame back in that game. And Jaden Greathouse did too. It was funny. I was watching this game with a friend of mine who is a Notre Dame fan, and I was talking about Jaden Greathouse, or we were really just talking generally about the Notre Dame receivers, and Jaden Greathouse was mentioned, and he was kind of like, yeah, he's not very good. I'm like, dude, don't be hating on him. He's pretty good. And probably about 30 minutes to an hour goes past, and that's when Jaden Greathouse really starts making his impact on the game. This gritty comeback just shows the culture that Marcus Freeman is building out there. And the reason why people like me have belief that what they're doing over in South Bend is sustainable, and what they're doing at South Bend could win them a championship one day. It could be next year. It could be 5 years from now. I don't know. And I could very well see Notre Dame ending up in the same casual conversation that Ryan Day once was in, that Kirby Smart once was in, that Dabo Swinney once was in, and that's the guy that, they can't win the big one. They can't win the big one. There's a big difference between can't and haven't. Josh Pate says it all the time, and I'm definitely using his sentiment because I 100% wholeheartily agree with him. When you are talking about these head coaches that have gotten close, Dane Lanning is going to be in the same boat in the next couple of years. Maybe just next year if they can do it next year. But Dan Lanning, Marcus Freeman, they're probably going to be the new age of coaches. Steve Sarkisian, who are going to be like Ryan Day, are going to be the coaches viewed as the guys who can't win the big game, the guys who can't get over the top. and then they eventually get over the top. One of those three coaches are going to do it at some point. Dane Lanning, Marcus Freeman, and Steve Sarkisian. And the biggest reason why Marcus Freeman is involved in that is because of what is exemplified through that grit that they showed in coming back and making it a one-score game in the fourth quarter against Ohio State. They had a real shot, guys, to be able to tie that game up. The way their offense was moving, they were a 3rd and 11 away, which, people, Notre Dame fans, you can be mad at Christian Gray all you want. That's a young player going up against probably the best freshman receiver we have ever seen. And he just straight up burnt him, and Christian Gray had no help. It's not the first time in that game, by the way, that Christian Gray got no help, and he probably was hoping to get some help on number 4. I think that Notre Dame is building a lot of the right things. I really think if you're a Notre Dame fan, you're super thankful for Riley Leonard and the mentality that he had, and you're super thankful for these older guys, but I don't think you guys are going to miss them a ton. If you really think about the guys who made an impact, first of all, one of the guys who would have made an impact and would have helped out Notre Dame a lot in their chances to win yesterday, Benjamin Morrison. Benjamin Morrison was supposed to be going to the NFL draft. Sounds like he's coming back. Even if, hypothetically, he wouldn't come back, I'd be saying the same things about Notre Dame. I like what they're going to have. Listen, they're going to replace some good players. They're going to have to replace guys like, for example, Mitch Evans, but I think they're fine with Raritan there. They're going to have to replace Xavier Watts. That's not easy to replace an eraser in the back end like that. They're going to have to replace Jack Kaiser, an experienced player, Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Those guys are going to be gone. But with that being said, this Notre Dame team has a lot of young pieces with them. Their wide receiver room is likely going to develop to be better. And with Mike Denbrock's system, you're going to have a quarterback that's going to be a completely different style than Riley Leonard. He's going to be a better passer. And I personally thought coming out of high school, CJ Carr was going to be a real stud, and he still very well could be. He was just a true freshman. And then you also have Steve Angeli, who's been in the program for a while. He's waited his turn, and he's going to get the chance to battle for the job. Probably in the spring, they're going to make a decision. So Angeli knows whether or not he's got to move on from Notre Dame and go transfer somewhere else. But regardless on who wins the battle, whether it's Angeli, the more experienced guy, CJ Carr, the more talented blue chip guy, they're going to be pretty well off at the quarterback position. They're going to have Jeremiah Love back. And the biggest thing I love about Notre Dame is because they were so challenged with injuries this year, it was already going to be an inexperienced offensive line coming in. They're going to return both guys that were supposed to and then eventually did start at left tackle this season. Charles Jagasaw was supposed to be the starter week 1, and he got hurt. And he somehow was able to get back ready in time for the national championship. He played in the semifinal, started in the national championship, and outside of one holding call, he played pretty well. And he had to play back at left tackle because Anthony Knapp, the true freshman, came in, and he took a minute to get going, but he was playing like a dog prior to him getting hurt. You're going to bring back a lot on your offensive line. You're going to have a good tight end room. I think they could upgrade at quarterback when it comes to slinging the rock. Even if that run game aspect isn't there, that could be a breath of fresh air for Mike Denbrock. And that defense is still going to be really good, especially if they can hang on to Al Golden. I expect for Notre Dame to be in the national championship conversation next year. And I think Notre Dame right now is, at least for me, a top 2 or 3 favorite to win it all next year. I know that might be a hot take for some of you, but I'm here for the hot takes. So the question that has been rung across the internet, and it's mainly been propagated by Michigan fans and SEC fans, is the Ohio State National Championship a legitimate one? Did they actually earn it? Or did they not deserve this chance to go and win it? The journey to the national championship was a very odd one for Ohio State. Nothing really happened very early on in the first month of the season or so. You got kind of introduced with a couple of highlight reel plays by Jeremiah Smith and welcome him into there. And then they go to Oregon, their first real test. And the defense did not play super well, but the offense did. The offense played probably their best game of the regular season against Oregon in Autzen Stadium against a very quality opponent. And we all know what happened there. Will Howard slides and they lose by one. Don't get me wrong, though. I don't think that's on Will Howard. I truly think the defense didn't perform up to the level that they're capable of. But the defense got it right with all the red zone stops that they made against Nebraska and the plays that they were able to make to keep Ohio State in the game when the offense now wasn't clicking. Those issues would rear their ugly head later in the year, those issues they had with Nebraska. But it raised a bunch of questions with how that offensive line played against Nebraska, how they would be able to block deny Dennis Sutton and Keziah Izzard and Abdul Carter, obviously. And they had a good game plan for it. And Abdul Carter got his. He had 2 third down sacks in a row in that third quarter that really kept Penn State in that football game. That and a fumble through the end zone by Will Howard kept Penn State in the game. But the defense bowed up, didn't allow a single offensive touchdown for the Nittany Lions, 2 goal line stands for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and they go on the road to Happy Valley and beat a playoff team that ended up playing in the college football playoff semifinals. And it was all just smiles, doubt us now type of conversation around Columbus. Everybody was happy. You have a couple of cupcake games before Indiana comes to town trying to challenge Ohio State. And then when Ohio State wipes them off the field, Ohio State's sky high. You have me over here saying that Ohio State's going to win the national championship because they took a punt back against Indiana. When back in 2014 was the last time they took a punt back, and it was against Indiana. But when the next week happened and Ohio State loses to Michigan, and you have the brawl that takes place on that football field, and really before the brawl, let's just set the immediacy of what happens in this game and the impact that it has. Ohio State loses to Michigan in an ugly game where the offense couldn't get going. We know the story there, right? And that's their second loss. If it was a 14 format, they would have been out. We all know this. They lose to the team that has been truly the worst nightmare for Ohio State the last 3 years, responsible for all 3 of Ohio State's Big Ten losses. There are only 3 Big Ten losses over that 3-year stretch, and they have a chance to go to the Big Ten championship and clinch a rematch with the Oregon Ducks. And what happens? They let it get away from them with poor offense, untimely turnovers, and the defense did everything they could to keep Ohio State in the game. Missed kicks, all the miscues. When that immediate score goes final, Ohio State 10, Michigan 13, that thought of Ohio State is going to win the national championship I had after the Caleb Downs punt return against Indiana immediately shifted to something completely different. As I know we're going to make the playoff, but we're going to be lucky based on how this went and the fallout that this is going to create and all of the distraction that this is going to make for the coaching staff in particular. I don't see how they win a playoff game. But see, the picture I just had pulled up was symbolic of the journey that Ohio State had. They took that defeat on the chin, and they weren't going to let that defeat bother them any more than it had to. They had to get over it. They had their time. during the week of conference championship weekend when Ohio State was not participating, they had their time to recover from the heartbreak of this loss. But this picture, the fight that Ohio State had on their home field, listen, I'm not calling for fights or anything. I'm not condoning this whatsoever. I think it was very ugly at the time, but it just demonstrates that they really just needed to get through that game, win or loss, to be able to clear their heads and get that team out of their rearview window. And the big thing too is these seniors, they were fired up that they lost to these guys, and they weren't going to let them embarrass them any further, because they're going to be embarrassed for the rest of their lives that they don't have gold pants. They're not going to let Michigan plant that flag on the field for a second time in the shoe in the last 3 years. They're not letting that happen. Jack Sawyer is not letting that happen. Those leaders were not going to stand for it. And at the end of the day, when you want to talk about everything put together, you want to argue about the Ohio State National Championship being illegitimate. Ohio State, the first argument that you hear is they had a $20 million roster. It was all their guys who earned that money through making a name for themselves that would have been drafted in the NFL, and they all decided to come back for one mission. And part of that mission was to beat Michigan. And for you Michigan fans out there, you can be very happy that you could say that this group, this great, incredible group that won a national championship, even if they accomplished that, they still couldn't beat us. Even we went 8-5 and they won the national championship, but they still couldn't beat us. That's what you should be saying. But instead, what you're doing is you're making Buckeye fans happy right now, because just like you guys, there's an old term that I heard in a documentary about the game, Ohio State, Michigan, called Schadenfreude. It's misery, or it's joy in the misery of your enemy. Ohio State not only had the joy of their own team, they were feeling the joy of the misery of at least Michigan fans. Ohio State fans were. Because Michigan fans, instead of being like, congrats on your national championship, still couldn't beat us though. That would sting a lot more than this national championship doesn't count. Man, this national championship doesn't count because they spent $20 million to pluck a couple players out of the portal and go get, man, you spent half that on one player that lives 20 miles away from campus. You realize you paid this kid $1 million per 2 miles, $500,000 per mile. And if you didn't, he wouldn't be going to your precious little Michigan, would he be? The second thing you want to talk about, they didn't win their conference. We saw that Ohio State team play the conference champion in a neutral site, and it was a smackdown. Absolute smackdown. So sure, they're not going to have the Big Ten championship trophy. Oregon can have that because Ohio State has the Rose Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, and the national championship trophy because they beat that Big Ten champion. They beat both teams that played in the Big Ten championship. But you're going to throw a fit because Ohio State didn't win their conference, even though we've seen this already twice before in the last 10 years, in the last decade. Since 2017, this is the third time that happened. Didn't beat Michigan. That's the argument you make? Brother, that's a separate issue for sure. And that's something that Ohio State really wants to fix. but you control what you can control. In Ohio State, everybody agreed on the 12-team format. I guarantee you most Michigan fans that are complaining yesterday and today wanted the 12-team format. But these people are salty. They're throwing a fit because it's the Ohio State Buckeyes who were able to get a second life from it. It was generated to try to get the one true best team. We knew it would take away importance for the top tier of college football in the regular season. It shifts the importance. It meant more, the regular season did, to a team like Boise State and Arizona State going on the hot run that they went on. It meant more to those schools, and those conference championships certainly did. But it does indeed mean less at the top. But that also meant that we were caring about more games late in the year. Sure, we didn't really care about Oregon and Washington, but we surely cared what was going on between Miami and Syracuse. That knocked Miami out, right? Ole Miss and Florida knocked Ole Miss out. Alabama and Oklahoma, that knocked out Alabama. Like, they didn't beat Michigan. And that, to me, is a failure. The regular season was indeed a failure. But it was not enough of a failure. They were selected to be in the college football playoff. Nobody had a problem with it. Everybody knew that Ohio State deserved to be in the 12-team playoff. But you don't complain when you think they're going to lose. You only complain after they win. After they go on an unreal gauntlet. They set a record this year for the most wins against AP top 5 teams. Their last 4 games, in response to that Michigan game, they beat the number 9, number 5, number 4, and the number 3 team. Oh, sorry, I might have the rankings mixed up. I think it's like 2, 3, 4, 9 or something like that. They beat top 10 Tennessee, top 5 Oregon, who was number 1 and undefeated all year, and undoubtedly they beat top 5 Texas, and they beat top 5 Notre Dame, who beat the Georgia Bulldogs en route, who beat the Penn State Nittany Lions en route to a national championship appearance. But not only did Ohio State beat them, they looked good doing it. They beat all of them by double figures. The closest game was 11 points. The closest margin of victory was yesterday, and the tightest game was probably Texas. Not probably, it definitely was. I'm not saying we're never going to see this again. I'm not saying that Ohio State did something that is just generational and we're never going to see it again. I don't know. We don't have enough of a sample size of the 12-team playoff. But what I do know is this, is if every team has to go through the same gauntlet or a similar gauntlet or even a little bit less than what Ohio State went through this year, they earned that championship. They earned that championship, and it doesn't matter what logo it is. If you are beating 3 or 4 top 10 teams in the postseason to win the national championship, you are undoubtedly the national champion in everybody's eyes. Congratulations to the Ohio State Buckeyes, the players, the coaches, all the scrutiny you guys went and took right on the chin and kept rolling with the punches. It's truly an inspirational story that me as a Buckeye fan, I'm going to one day tell my kids about. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you like the video and subscribe. This is definitely a little bit longer than I'm used to, but it's finishing off the college football season. It was a fun one, but we're not done. We'll be back here tomorrow posting a video later tomorrow night. I'll see you guys.